I think a bit of a theme in what I've done over the last 10 plus years has just been trying stuff because it seems interesting, not being sure where it's going to go, and then it ends up going somewhere really cool.
You are listening to Personal Development Mastery, the podcast that empowers you with the simple and consistent actions you need to create a life of purpose and fulfillment. I'm your host, Agi Keramidas, and this is episode 380. Have you ever wondered how a deep passion for what you do can transform the mundane grind into an exciting journey to success? My guest today, Rob Dix, is the co-host of one of the UK's most popular business podcasts, the Property Podcast. I have been following Rob since 2016 and his insights have been invaluable to me, so it was a privilege to finally connect with him on the podcast. During the conversation, you will discover how cultivating your curiosity and embracing your passion makes consistency and discipline easy. This way, success becomes inevitable. You will also listen to me sharing, for the first time publicly, how Rob D inspired me to start writing my first book, 88 Actionable Insights for Life. Before we dive right into this fascinating conversation, if you enjoy listening and appreciate what we're doing here, the simple, quick favor I'm asking of you is to click the subscribe button. Now let's get started. Today I am thrilled to speak with Rob Dix. Rob, you are a Sunday Times best-selling author, investor, co-founder of the Property Hub, and you are also the co-presenter of one of the UK's most popular business podcasts, the Property Podcast, that has been running for over 10 years now. You are passionate about entrepreneurship, sharing insights through your podcasts and books, and helping others succeed in the realm of property investing. Rob, welcome. It's such a delight to speak with you today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I will add here to that introduction I made that I have been a follower of your work since 2016. And at that time, I remember I was binge listening to the Property Podcast on my commute to work at that time every day. And I always found your knowledge and your outlook on life very inspiring. So I'm just acknowledging that as my own personal addition to the introduction. That's why I'm so thrilled to have you here today.
Thank you. It's great that you've been listening for so long.
If anyone had told me 8 years ago when I was listening, that was probably one of the first podcasts I ever listened to in 2016. If someone had told me that 8 years later I would be having you as a guest on my podcast, I'd say you must be crazy. Rob, I would like to explore today some topics that you don't often discuss in your podcast. So rather than talk about investing and property, I would like to discuss the mindset, the habits, the consistency of doing the little actions or taking the small action. In a way, I consider that, I don't know about you, I consider that the foundation where, everything else can be built. So let's start with that. Do you think it is indeed the foundation?
The key for me, at least, has been finding something that I really enjoy doing. And so consistency isn't a chore. Like, I'm not good at being consistent on things I don't want to do. Mm-hmm. I agree that being consistent, taking the right actions over time is what you have to do. I think some people can force themselves to do it. I can't. I just had to find something where I wanted to do it.
Wouldn't you say that there is a mixture of self-discipline and that, or are you so lucky only to be doing the things that consistently, the things that you enjoy doing?
Yeah, I think I come across as being a self-disciplined person, but I'm not convinced I really am. I think I've just been lucky to be able to find things that I want to show up and do. And I've got a track record of giving up on plenty of things that I don't like doing. So I think that's really the secret to it.
Probably, and I will keep that as an observation, that consistency is so much easier when you love doing what you're doing. But I will say indeed that I do consider you, from following you, a very disciplined and consistent person. So it's great to hear the other part of it. Before we go into the nitty-gritty of that, Rob, I wanted to ask something I often ask my guests, and that's, in their story, in their journey, was there some kind of a key defining moment, something that changed everything for you in terms of actions or mindset at some point? I'm sure there are a few, but something maybe relevant to this conversation.
I think a bit of a theme in what I've done over the last 10 plus years has just been trying stuff because it seems interesting, not being sure where it's going to go, and then it ends up going somewhere really cool. So I started a podcast about property probably about 12 years ago because I wanted to know about property and I wanted to know about podcasting. I didn't know that much about either of them, but I wanted to figure out how it worked. And so I started that podcast. And on the third episode of that podcast, I met someone else called Rob, who went on to be my co-host of the property podcast for now the last 10 years. And that came about just because I was kind of following my curiosity. Same with my most recent book, The Price of Money. I started writing that because I wanted to understand how the economy works. And the way that I understand things, to check I understand them, is to write them down. And it was only towards the very end of that process that I decided to publish that book. And it's gone on to do very well. But this is, so I suppose in terms of like, you asked like key moments and things like that. I think there have been, but they've always originated from just doing whatever seemed interesting at the time without having any set expectation of where it was going to go.
I like what you just said, and the thing you said about trying stuff, and you use the word follow your curiosity, and that's something that I believe it's very important to, as a starting point. And then it is quite similar how I started my podcast. It was following curiosity. Very quickly afterwards, I realized how happy I was and how energized I was when I was doing it. I had a buzz, so I thought, okay, let me do more of this. And here we are. Like for me, it's 6 years down the line. There are a couple of things. You already answered me to some extent about the why you started the podcast, and I'm happy with that answer. You said that you got inspired, you followed your curiosity. Is there something else you wanted to add to that? With
yeah, it was. Then when we started the property podcast, which is the one that I've been doing now with the other Rob for 10 years, I always credit Rob with the vision. Like he had far more of an idea about where it could go and what could be built off the back of it. For me, it was just, I like talking about the subject. I find it easier to talk about it with someone else than doing it solo. So great. And there really wasn't much more of a thought process to it. So I think he had the vision. But I think we were lucky because it was, we enjoyed turning up to talk to each other, and it didn't really matter if anyone else was listening. As it happened, we started so early that we managed to attract listeners quite quickly because there wasn't much competition. Like if you wanted to hear about property on a podcast, we were it. So you didn't matter if you liked it, you were stuck with us. So we did actually kind of get off the ground quite fast. But I think I think Rob knew where it could go, but for me, it was just like, this is a fun thing to do.
I think from the way it sounds, it's great to hear the different dynamics or the contrast. You say one having the vision and thinking of that, the other enjoying and talking about something that he wanted to learn. Apart from the fact that, at that time you said that you were the only, or pretty much the only, property podcast that someone could listen to, what else do you think has contributed to this success of the podcast, this great success of it?
I put it down to 3 things. First mover advantage, I'm going to say it again because it was a huge head start. Like if you tried to do the same again, it would be harder, and I think much harder. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, because it's always easy to go, oh yeah, we did this and we're so great, but there's a lot of timing to it. The second is consistency. You've already brought up consistency. We have not missed an episode in 10 years. Every single Thursday, including Christmas Day, including New Year's Day, including when we've got children being born and all kinds of stuff going on, there's always an episode comes out. And I think that matters, not in the fact that there'd be thousands of people around the country going, what is going on, if there's a Thursday morning and there wasn't a property podcast. But I think on some level, people notice and respect the consistency. And it's important to us. Keeping that streak is important to us, and just showing up and getting better. Like if you go back and listen to the first episodes, they were rubbish. So like just getting those reps in and getting better over time. So that's the second thing. And I think the third is the rapport between the two of us, because I think it's a magic ingredient in podcasting. All my favorite podcasts are duos. I think pulling off an interview show is really hard. You will know this. Doing solo episodes, I think it's hard to hold someone's attention when it's just someone talking away on your own and trying to sound interesting for half an hour or whatever it is. I think the duo format is really good, and we're lucky that we've got a good rapport between us. So I'd say that those are the three drivers to the success we've had.
I can certainly understand what you were saying about the rapport between you two, because it's really enjoyable, to listen, and the sense of humor and the banter and bouncing back and forth. It's sometimes I wonder how it's very precise where one stops and the other person, like you have a signal that, okay, I'm going to stop now, and the other talks.
Yeah. Well, having a producer helps, because you can take out all the times that it doesn't work. But for the most part, yeah, we've just been doing it so long, we can just kind of read each other a bit, I guess.
If you enjoy this episode, can you find one person you think would find it useful and share it with them? I'd really appreciate it. It helps the show grow, and you'll also be adding value to people you care about. Thank you. And now let's get back to the episode. I'm going to change direction a little bit. I could be talking about the podcast, or generally podcast, the whole conversation, but let's not. I wanted to discuss, there was actually in your newsletter not so long ago, it was when I actually reached out to you and invited you to this. There was something that you had written there that I found very reassuring. I found it very inspiring. Reassuring in the sense that when someone that has achieved this level of success with your business, with the podcast and so on, like you have, shares that, and I'm going to say in a moment what that is, then really I think it is very encouraging for others that are on the journey. However, they have not seen yet maybe the results or the outcomes that one might expect after a period of time. And I will paraphrase a little bit what you were saying there on the newsletter, but you were saying that now that you have found yourself, having, I think you said, decent success in some projects, you have been looking for ways to achieve this kind of success in other things faster. And skip the multi-year grind, and you had reached that to the conclusion that this is not how it goes. It doesn't happen like this. The answer is to just start and stay consistent, and that was actually your word, stay consistent, and wait longer than you would like for the eventual and inevitable results. So I think in that phrase it included many things there. I don't want to analyze it myself. I would prefer if you give me your comments on this.
Yeah, I'll have a go. So I think there's always the temptation to take a shortcut, right? Everyone has that. Everyone wants to get there faster. And I think you can think, like, when you've achieved something, you built something up, it's easy for your ego to go, I deserve to be able to, and maybe I even should be able to take this and apply it somewhere else. I should have an advantage sort of for taking this and sort of parlaying it into this other thing. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the time that turns out not to be true. And there are multiple reasons for that. But one of the reasons I think, or that I recognized in myself at least, is when you start something, you're normally not that good at it. Mm-hmm. And so when we started podcasting, we weren't very good. When we then got to a point by doing it over and over again that we were okay. When we started on YouTube, we weren't very good. So it's easy to go, oh, well, we've got this podcast. Therefore, we should be able to take the same formula, the same audience, the same whatever, and build a YouTube channel. But we weren't very good. And so it's a completely different medium. So of course, we don't deserve to do well straight away. And there's no way to get good other than to spend the time putting the reps in, doing it again and again. And I think that's becomes hard for your ego to come to terms with. And I think that gets harder once you've had success in one area. But you have to, I eventually got to a point of embracing it and go, well, actually, I wouldn't want to get there faster, because if by some magic I did get there faster, then I would have some kind of eyeballs on what I'm doing. I'd have some degree of prominence in this thing, and I still wouldn't be good at it. So lots of people would see me being rubbish. It's better if people didn't see me being rubbish, and it takes the time to get you there. But then the final thing is, I sort of said the eventual and inevitable result, because I think it is inevitable. If you spend that long doing something, you have to succeed in it in the end, almost because you can't do something for that long and still be bad at it. And if you didn't enjoy it and you weren't seeing some improvement and getting some rewards from it, you would have given up. So purely by persisting for a decade, almost by default, you have to have some success. Otherwise, you wouldn't still be there after a decade.
It's what they say, to appreciate the journey rather than, of course, keep your eye on the destination, but appreciate the journey, because it is the journey that we experience. The destination, I don't know if you agree, it's usually very quickly replaced by another destination if you start to look at it in such a way.
Yeah, it's all about the journey, isn't it? And you think I think, well, it's always easy to convince yourself that it's about the destination, and you need to have the destination, I think, a lot of the time as a motivating factor. But I found that as soon as I achieve a thing, I don't care anymore. I'm on to the next thing immediately. I'm sure it'd be healthier to take time and celebrate and acknowledge and blah, blah, blah. But the reality is that's just not how it is.
What advice you would give to someone listening right now and finding themselves being on the journey and maybe getting impatient with, impatient is one thing. When you get unsure about this, that's probably much more important, because it could jeopardize the progress that one has made. So what advice would you give to a person listening?
Oh, it's hard. It's hard to come up with something actionable for this, because like the obvious thing is to find enjoyment in the process, because like I said, that's what we've had with the podcast for all this time. And I enjoyed the process of trying to get better at YouTube. I enjoyed the process of trying to write a book. And all of those things are very frustrating endeavors. The whole point of being on any journey is it's going to be frustrating at times. But I think if you can expect that and then just find little hints of success to keep yourself going, and judge yourself against how you were 6 months ago rather than judging yourself against how someone else is today. Because if you're judging yourself against other people, there are always going to be people better than you at whatever it is that you're doing. And so you're just going to see the chasm between where you are and where you want to be. But if you're judging yourself against your past self, and you're just looking for those little indications, even if it's only tiny, it's just a message from someone saying that they enjoyed it or whatever. I think those are the things you've got to hang on to. And ideally, find other people who are doing the same thing to hold each other accountable and keep each other encouraged. That's not something that I've done in any of the realms that we've talked about, but I've started to see the benefits of having a peer group recently. And I think that can be something very powerful.
Thank you. And that was actually actionable, I believe. So thank you for your answer. Let's change gears for a moment. There was something I wanted to discuss about your book, actually, the Price of Money. And there is something else. First of all, congratulations on the best-selling title. There was something again that I read in your newsletter, which I have referred to a couple of times before, and I probably will again during this conversation. And you said something that it's been 10 years since the time that you self-published your first book, and now it feels like you have become a quote-unquote proper author having a book like that. So my personal question here, Rob, is how does that feel? How is it different than the other numerous books that you have put out?
How's it different? I think the difference is actually in how other people perceive it rather than me, because I'm published by a proper publisher now, and so that means that I don't know, the cover looks a bit nicer. It's available in bookshops, where previously it wasn't. But nothing's that different about. Nothing feels different to me. Nothing was different in the process of how I wrote the book. The book isn't necessarily any better than any of my previous ones, but it just it looks different from the outside. And having that badge of that badge of like having a penguin sitting on the book, like it's a tiny little bird, but it makes a big difference in terms of what other people think. And so like from that, like I think that was a contributing factor to getting us a column in the Sunday Times. And then being in the Sunday Times has like led to being asked to do TV stuff and all this kind of thing. And it's this weird interaction with the mainstream legacy media world where it still means something to have that badge. So that's the reason I went down the publishing route, because it's like, I know what self-publishing looks like. I know what success is possible. Going with a proper publisher might be exactly the same, but it at least creates the possibility of other things happening off the back of it. So it's a known downside, uncapped upside type situation. And so, yeah, it's just funny. People look at it in a different way, even though the actual product is literally the same. Like I self-published the book, then I got a published deal that came out of the publisher. It's the same book, but people look at it in a completely different way.
Yeah, I suppose from my point of view, there is some kind of prestige having a book in, Waterstones or whatever, compared to just Amazon. But yeah, there is. But apart from that, no, I appreciate your answer that it's more about how others perceive it rather than how you perceive it.
And it kind of makes sense when you think about it, because it shows that someone somewhere has looked at it and said, this is okay. And everyone, there's far more than anyone could ever read or listen to or watch or whatever, right? So like having some kind of gatekeeper, some kind of filter, someone who you can look at and go, oh, it must be okay. That's going to count for something.
I will stay in the topic of book for a moment, and I wanted to I'm going to share a little story here which very, very few people know about, so it's probably the first time that it comes public as that, but I wanted to express some appreciation, and let me show you. I'm sure you recognize this book.
Blast from the past.
One of the first ones. So for those that only listening to us right now, it's called 100 Property Investment Tips. So my little story is that, I had that book since 2017 or something like that. I wanted to write a book myself since I went into my own personal development journey, which was roughly around that time in 2016. And I never knew what to write or how to present it. I knew it would have to do something with personal development, which had been my passion, learning it and teaching it, but I never was sure of what to write. And it was a year, close to 2 years ago, I was just idly looking at my bookshelf, when you see the sides of the books. And I saw that book, the 100 Property Investment Tips, and the idea came to me immediately that, I don't have to write a book that has, cohesion, and I mix all the elements that I want to present in a structured way. I can present it like this, like tips. So my initial working title of the book was 100 personal development tips.
See what you did there.
Eventually, the book worked its way, and then it became 88 actionable insights for life. But I want to thank you really for that inspiration that you gave me by your book without your knowledge. But I wanted to acknowledge you and tribute as a mentor and as someone who gave me that initial spark on how to write the book. Thank you.
You're welcome. And we probably nicked the idea of someone else to start with. I can't remember now, but that's how we come up with all our best ideas. Everything's recycled, isn't it? So yeah, that's awesome.
Sure. But for me, it was important, to be able to thank you like that, because it feels quite absurd that things, there are 100 of this or 88 of that in many forms. But for me, it was the catalyst, to express something that I didn't know how to express. And there is one, I will ask one more question about the book, because it was something I read. You were referring that about the last 10% of the book. You have the 90% of the book that takes 90% of the time, and the 10% of the book that I think it takes the other 90% of the time. Yeah. So tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, well, you might have had some insight into this yourself, but it's
yes, indeed.
Yeah, it's painful. Like, you think I don't know what it is, but you think you've written the book, and so the process normally goes: you'll sort of write a draft. You'll think it's okay. You'll give it to someone. They'll point out the 400 ways it's not okay. Then you'll go rewrite it again, realizing that yes, they were completely right. You'll write it again. Then you'll do a draft that's actually quite good. And then they go, yeah, that's actually quite good. Now we'll just make a few tweaks. And those tweaks go on forever. And it's just so annoying, because for me, at least, I'm not a natural finisher. I get my enjoyment from starting stuff. And so by the time a decent draft is done, I've had my reward at that point. And then it's just grind to get to actually finish off all the last bits and get the books. It's painful. So I think it's worth acknowledging, because if you're aware of it, then you can at least be prepared for it and go, okay, this is part of the process. And if possible, maybe partner up with someone where it's more naturally their skill set and get some help from them. But yeah, I love starting books. I don't mind writing books. I hate finishing books.
I'm glad that you have gone past that, at least with some of the books, and you finished them, because when they are unfinished, no one can read them, so you can't really make the impact or influence others. I will change the subject again, Rob. I mean, I have so many things that come to my mind. There were a couple of things that I wanted to find out, because I don't remember ever hearing the answer. I'm sure you have said it, but again, it's probably not very common. And one is your nickname, the property Geek, that you are referred to for a long time now. I wanted to ask, what does this title mean to you, and how does it reflect your passion for property?
I don't remember there being an amazing reason for it. I think it's just just a bit of branding. Like, it's better to something like that is more memorable than just the name of someone you've never heard of. So I think that's kind of it. But then I think I like to take a somewhat geeky approach to things in terms of really understanding them. So there's loads of ways to do property, right? There's loads of ways to do everything, but in property, you can really dive in. You can really be hands on. You can just get out there and negotiate. You can just there are loads of different personality types and skill sets you can use. Mine was more analytical, and it was about trying to really understand the fundamentals of how it all works and coming at it from more of a numbers point of view. So that's why it's accurate. But the purpose of it, I think, was just a bit of branding.
But it stuck, and I think you still sign as the property geek, which And there's one other thing, researching with your background, I found out, I didn't know until recently, that you have a background in psychology and cognitive neuroscience. How has this background influenced your approach in investing and what you do?
I think I always had that interest. And like this was like, 20 years ago or something, I studied this. And so at the time, I think psychology was a lot less mainstream. Now, a load of the stuff that I was learning about back then is like turned up in bestsellers by, Malcolm Gladwell and people like that. Like all the kind of concepts are very well known in a way that they weren't back then. And lots of people, because those are bestsellers, lots of people obviously find this stuff interesting in the way that I did back then. But I think just having the understanding of how, like everything, I mean, this is ultimate cliche, but everything comes down to people, doesn't it? Like property is clearly very much about people. It's the most personal investment I think you can make. But it's the same for everything. And people are weird. And understanding that is helpful, and not expecting the world to work in a mechanistic way. But I think that's really why property stuck with me in a way that lots of other things didn't. It's like, it's that people aspect that made it more, that kind of kept my attention more than investment in the stock market or anything else. But then by the time I did get to thinking about the markets and the economy and everything else, it's important to remember that that's all about psychology as well. Like if you think about things like booms and crashes, like that's largely psychology, like at a mass level. And just like, and for everything that's going on in the world, everyone has different views about what is happening and why it's happening, filtered through their own psychology. There is no objective way that this is the case, this is why it's happened. Everyone is just 10 people can be given exactly the same set of facts and generate different explanations for what that means and why it's come to be. And I think that's really useful to keep in mind. And just have that thing that, well, this might be what I think, but that doesn't mean it's true. And someone else could be thinking something completely different. So that's quite helpful.
Thank you. It's useful to understand it like that. That both what you said about the people that and communication and negotiation, all these things, and what you were just saying right now. There are two quick questions that I always ask my guests, Rob, at the end of the conversation. Before I ask them, what is the best place for someone to connect or find out more about what you do?
So if someone's interested in property, then go to propertyhub.net. You'll find the podcast and a newsletter that I write and all manner of other things. If you're not so interested in property, then you can go to my website, robdix.com, ROBDIX, because that's where you'll find my newsletter and writings about random other subjects.
Yes, I will. I said already about the newsletter. Thank you, Rob. And I have then two last quick questions. And the first one is, what does personal development mean to you?
That's an interesting question. I think personal development to me just means always pushing yourself a little bit and not being content. So I think it's important to try and hold two contradictory things in mind at the same time. So like being satisfied with your life and grateful for your life and grateful for all the wonderful things that have happened to you and everything else, super, super, super important. But also you've got to be a bit dissatisfied because you've got to want more, whether that's more knowledge or more fitness or more relationships or more something. And of course, the way to get any of those things is not to sit around hoping that it just falls into your lap. It's to go out and do something yourself to make it happen. And so that's, I think, where personal development comes in for me. It's just doing that work on yourself to get yourself a little bit more of what you want and to see what you're capable of.
Thank you. And one hypothetical question. If you could go back in time and meet your 18-year-old self, what's one piece of advice you would give him?
Well, I know that he'd ignore it. So I could say anything, right? Because isn't that the whole point? Like 18-year-olds, you can tell them anything. They're not going to listen. I had a lot of fun in my 20s. I was working in the music industry. It was great, but I don't think it was until my 30s that I started getting a bit more deliberate about the choices I was making. And I think there's obviously, like, your 20s is when you've typically got the fewest commitments and the most energy. So that's where I would encourage myself, even though I wouldn't, to think things through a bit more, to think about where I wanted to end up and have a more deliberate plan in place for how to get there. Because I have, like I said, right back at the beginning, I've just kind of followed whatever seems interesting, and that's ended up in a really good place. But I think that I know people now who are like, right, so where do I want to be at 40? Well, that means by 30 I need to be here, by 25 I need to be here. What's going to get me there? What career choices can I make, et cetera, and do all that. And I think that's probably the way to do it. Being more intentional about where you want to end up and making use of all that time and energy that you've got. I'd encourage myself to do more of that.
Rob, I want to thank you very much for this conversation we had. I really enjoyed it, and it was a real pleasure to have you on the show today. I want to wish you all the very best with both personally and professionally with what you do. And I will leave it to you for your last parting words.
Oh, on the spot. I don't think I've got any great words of wisdom, so I'll just say thank you. It's really cool to hear that we played some small part in what you've been doing. And isn't that the cool thing about all of this? You just do stuff and you have no idea how it's going to affect someone, and it can just happen in really random and unpredictable ways. So I'm glad that we played a part in that, and congratulations on everything you've done.
And before I end today's episode, an open invitation to you listening right now. I invite you to find me on social media and send me a direct message about anything you prefer. You can tell me who your favorite guest has been so far, or who you would like me to interview next, or what topic you would like to hear. So drop me a line and I look forward to chatting with you. Until next time, stand out, don't fit in,